My name is Emily Carter, and for the longest time, I believed my life was unfolding exactly the way I'd always dreamed. I was 29 years old, a marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company in Seattle, and about to marry the man I thought was my soulmate. His name was Ryan Mitchell. He was 32, tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of easy smile that charmed waitresses and strangers alike. We met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's Labor Day barbecue, and from that first beer-fueled conversation about hiking and bad 80s movies, I was hooked. For a long time, I believed Ryan was hooked, too. He said all the right things, made all the right promises, and proposed to me in the middle of a candlelit cabin in Leavenworth, with snow drifting down outside the windows like something out of a Hallmark movie. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Our wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in late June. The weather forecast was perfect, sunny and 75 degrees, and our guest list of nearly 200 people included everyone we loved. My mom and dad had flown in from Virginia to help me with last-minute details. My maid of honor, Jessica, had booked an entire suite at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel so I could get ready in style. The day before the wedding, I woke up early, too jittery to sleep in. My stomach was doing nervous flips as I went over my mental checklist. Dress steaming appointment at 9 a.m., hair trial at 11, venue walkthrough at 1, rehearsal dinner at 6. I knew it was normal to feel a little anxious. Everyone told me so. But there was something else under the nerves, a heaviness I couldn't quite name. I kept brushing it off, telling myself it was just pre-wedding jitters. The first sign that something was off came when Ryan didn't answer my morning call. I'd called to confirm what time he was meeting his groomsmen for golf. It went to voicemail. Twice. That wasn't like him. Ryan was an early riser, the kind of guy who had his phone practically glued to his hand. I told myself he was probably in the shower or caught up with his best man, Aaron. Still, a sour twinge settled in my gut as I set my phone down on the hotel's marble vanity. Around 10:15, while I was having my hair pinned into an elaborate updo by a stylist named Kelly, my phone buzzed with a text. Ryan. Hey babe, sorry, busy morning. Everything's good. Love you. I read the message 3 times. No explanation. No apology for disappearing. I tried to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. Jessica noticed. She always noticed everything. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch, drinking an iced latte and scrolling through photos of our bachelorette trip to Napa. You okay? She asked, arching a brow. Yeah, I lied. Just, nerves. She gave me a sympathetic look. He's probably just hungover or something. Guys are idiots the day before a wedding. I wanted so badly to believe that. But by noon, when Ryan still hadn't called, I felt the first prickle of suspicion. The kind that starts small but quickly grows claws. At 1 p.m., we did the venue walkthrough at the Belmont Gardens. The florist was fussing over centerpieces, the caterer was going over the final menu, and I could barely focus on any of it. My phone felt like a stone in my hand. I texted Ryan again. Hey, just checking in. Everything okay? No reply. By the time we returned to the hotel, my heart was hammering in my chest. I kept telling myself not to be dramatic, but a dozen little memories flickered through my mind. Times Ryan had come home late without explanation, times he'd seemed distracted when I talked about wedding details, the way he'd snapped at me 2 weeks ago when I asked if he was sure he was ready for this. I kept hearing my mom's voice in my head. Emily, love isn't always perfect. Sometimes men just need space. But this didn't feel like needing space. It felt like something else. I tried to shake it off. I took a shower, tried to eat a salad, and forced myself to put on the pale blue dress I'd picked for the rehearsal dinner. At 5:15, as I was slipping on my heels, Ryan finally called. Hey, he said when I answered. His voice sounded low, guarded. Hey, I echoed, trying to keep my tone light. You okay? I've been trying to reach you. Yeah, sorry. Just a lot going on. My mouth went dry. Like what? Just stuff. Stuff. It was such a nothing word. A placeholder for the truth. Ryan, I said carefully, if you're having second thoughts. Emily. He cut me off, his tone suddenly sharp. Can we not do this right now? My chest clenched. Okay, I whispered. He exhaled a long breath. I'll see you at dinner. The line went dead. Jessica looked up from her phone. He okay? I guess. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. At 6 p.m., we walked into the private dining room at Tavolata, where our families and wedding party were gathered around a long wooden table. Ryan was already there, sitting at the far end, a beer in his hand. He looked up when I came in and forced a smile. It didn't reach his eyes. All through dinner, I felt like I was watching a play I hadn't auditioned for. Ryan kept his hand on his phone under the table. Every time it buzzed, he flinched. After dessert, while everyone was toasting, I excused myself to the restroom. When I came back, I saw Ryan slip out the side door, phone pressed to his ear. That was the moment my unease solidified into certainty. Something was happening. Something I wasn't supposed to know. And whether or not it ruined my life, I was going to find out what it was. I woke the next morning with a headache that felt like punishment for caring too much. My eyes were dry and raw from crying, though I had promised myself I wouldn't shed another tear over him. The sunlight coming through the thin curtains felt too bright, too clean for the filth that had wormed its way into my life. I lay there listening to the hotel corridor outside, luggage wheels rolling by, the distant echo of a child laughing, the dull thunk of housekeeping carts. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it was a bad dream. But then I turned my head to the left, and my gaze fell on the discarded suit jacket draped over the chair. His jacket. The same one he'd been wearing last night when he disappeared for hours. I sat up slowly, my pulse starting to thump in my throat. All the little details I'd tried to ignore the night before were rising up again, louder and more insistent. How he'd been edgy all day, checking his phone, claiming he was going to the bar to meet an old friend. How he'd looked at me like he was memorizing something before he left the room. And then there was the call, an unknown number that had flashed across the screen right after midnight. He'd silenced it without a word, but his face had gone pale as paper. At the time, I'd told myself it was probably one of the groomsmen playing a prank. Now, I wasn't so sure. I rose from the bed, feeling unsteady as I crossed to the chair and picked up the jacket. It smelled like him, cologne and something sharper I couldn't place. My fingers explored the pockets automatically, half hoping to find nothing. But there it was, a folded receipt, still warm from being tucked against his body. I pulled it out, my hands shaking. It was from the Blue Orchid, a rooftop cocktail lounge all the way across town. Dated last night at 11:42 p.m. 2 drinks, one of them a whiskey he never drank unless he was trying to impress someone. I stared at it so long my eyes blurred. A part of me clung desperately to the idea that there was an innocent explanation. But another part, some deeper, more brutal instinct, knew better. I looked around the room, as if expecting the walls themselves to confirm it. The champagne bottle we'd planned to share remained unopened. His tie lay in a careless heap on the dresser, instead of hanging neatly as he usually kept it. It all felt wrong, like an unfinished puzzle with the ugliest piece missing. I pressed the receipt to my chest, squeezing my eyes shut. My thoughts spiraled, tumbling over themselves in frantic succession. What if he hadn't come back alone? What if he'd brought her here? The very idea sent bile crawling up my throat. A sudden, sharp knock at the door made me jump. I dropped the receipt and turned, heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. Room service. A voice called politely. I closed my eyes, let out a trembling breath. Just room service. But when I opened the door, I realized I wasn't ready to face anyone yet. I waved the porter off with a forced smile and locked the door again. In the silence that followed, I started gathering more clues, almost in a trance. I went to his suitcase, unzipped the front pocket, and found his phone charger coiled neatly inside. My hand hovered over his phone itself, sitting on the nightstand like a loaded gun. For a long moment, I only stared at it. I knew his password. He had trusted me with it months ago, when trust was something I believed would always be between us. I pressed my lips together, fighting an inner battle. Part of me felt like an intruder. Another part felt like a detective finally following her instincts. I picked up the phone and unlocked it. There, right at the top of his messages, was a thread with a name I didn't recognize. Mila. My heart sank as I tapped it open. The conversation was short but damning.
Can't wait to see you tonight.
When will she be asleep? Meet me on the roof. Just us. I read the words over and over, my brain refusing to absorb them all at once. The most painful part wasn't even the content. It was the casual intimacy in the way he wrote to her.
As if I didn't exist.
As if the life we'd built together was just a disposable costume he could shrug off. I dropped the phone onto the bed. My breath came ragged and shallow, and I pressed my fist to my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. But no matter how hard I tried to deny it, the truth was undeniable now. He'd been with her last night, hours before our wedding day. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my thoughts circling like vultures. Is it really happening? Am I about to marry someone who doesn't even have the decency to end it before sneaking off to someone else? For a while, I sat there numb, staring at the carpet. Then, slowly, the numbness began to fade. It left behind something else.
Rage.
Not a hysterical, tearful rage, but a cold, precise fury that sharpened everything around me. I stood up, feeling steadier than I had in days. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to confront him yet, not until I understood the full picture. Not until I'd seen it all with my own eyes. I grabbed my purse and tucked the receipt inside. As I did, I noticed a lipstick smudge on the collar of his shirt, pale pink, the color I never wore. It felt like the last puzzle piece sliding into place. When I left the room, I didn't look back. I don't remember how long I stood in that dark hallway, holding my breath as if that could make me invisible. My heart thundered so loud I was sure it would give me away, but I couldn't move. All I could do was stare through the gap in the doorway, my eyes straining to make sense of what I was seeing. The hotel suite that we'd chosen together looked like something out of a glossy magazine. Candles on every surface, champagne sweating in an ice bucket, rose petals scattered across the
bed.
But it wasn't me he'd planned this for. No, the person tangled in his arms, her hair tumbling over the embroidered pillows, was my maid of honor, Sophie. My best friend since college. The person I'd trusted to stand beside me in my happiest moment. It was like watching a play I hadn't auditioned for, and everyone else knew their lines but me. I pressed a hand over my mouth as bile surged into my throat. My engagement ring glinted mockingly in the dim light, and the diamond felt heavy, obscene, like something I'd stolen. My fiancé, Daniel, laughed at something Sophie whispered, a laugh I'd thought was reserved just for me. I stumbled back a step, knocking into a side table. The noise was just loud enough that they both froze. Daniel looked up, his face pale in the flickering candlelight. For one absurd moment, I thought he would try to pretend he hadn't seen me, that he would stay in that bed and act like nothing had happened. But instead, he untangled himself from Sophie with almost comical slowness. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, running a hand through his hair as if this was some casual misunderstanding. "Claire," he said, voice low and rough, "this isn't what you think." I barked out a laugh that sounded unhinged even to my own ears. "Really? Because it looks exactly like you're screwing my best friend the night before our wedding." Sophie pulled the sheet around herself, her face bright red. "Claire, I held up a hand, trembling so badly I had to clench my fist. "Don't. Just don't. I swear to God, if you say one word to me right now, I will not be responsible for what happens." Neither of them moved. The only sounds were the cheap hotel clock ticking and my ragged breathing. I backed out of the room, needing distance, air, anything to keep from collapsing right there on the carpet. But as I reached the hallway, I stopped. The edge of my suitcase peeked out from the open closet. My wedding dress hung in a garment bag by the door. For months, I had poured my life into this day. Every last detail. The playlist. The centerpieces. The vows I'd written and rewritten until they were perfect. I felt something break open inside me, something that had been straining for months, maybe years, to split wide. I'd always been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the forgiving girlfriend. But right then, All the stories I'd told myself about what I deserved and what love was supposed to be dissolved into nothing. I walked back into the suite. Daniel looked as though he was about to stand and come to me, but I raised my hand again, and he stopped like I'd slapped him. "I want you to listen very carefully," I said, my voice so cold it didn't sound like my own. "You two can figure out how to explain this to our families. You can decide who gets to call the guests tomorrow and tell them the wedding's off. But don't you dare try to contact me again." Sophie's lip quivered. "Claire, it was a mistake, it didn't." I cut her off, my laugh sharp and humorless. "A mistake? You've been sleeping with him for how long?" Silence. Sophie stared at the carpet. Daniel cleared his throat. "It started a few months ago. It just happened. I didn't plan it." I almost admired the audacity of that line. "Right," I whispered, "just like you didn't plan this romantic setup. The champagne. The rose petals. Very spontaneous." He had the decency to look ashamed, but it was too late. I'd already decided exactly how this story would end, and it wouldn't be with me crying in some hotel hallway while they pretended to apologize. "I'll be back for my things," I said flatly. "You can both leave before then or don't. I don't care." I turned and walked out before either of them could speak again. My phone buzzed in my purse as I stepped into the elevator. It was my sister, texting to see if I was excited for the rehearsal dinner. A hysterical laugh bubbled up, but I swallowed it down. I rode the elevator to the lobby and walked straight out into the sticky summer night. My mind was already racing, not with grief, but with an almost frightening clarity. If they thought I would disappear quietly, they didn't know me at all. The taxi driver barely looked at me as I slid into the back seat. "Where to?" he asked. I gave him my address automatically, then paused. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Take me to the Stonebridge Hotel, please." He nodded, pulling into traffic. I leaned my head against the cool glass and let the streetlights blur by. In all the stories I'd ever heard about betrayal, the cheated-on fiancé was always portrayed as the victim, broken, humiliated, pitted. But as the cab wound through the city, I realized I didn't feel like a victim at all. I felt electric, dangerous. By the time the taxi dropped me off, I had a plan. A perfect, savage plan. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent hours on the phone with the wedding coordinator, the caterer, the venue. I canceled everything. I made sure every vendor knew exactly why. I asked them to send the confirmation emails to both Daniel and Sophie. At 3 a.m., I wrote an email to all our guests explaining that the wedding was off due to irreconcilable differences and that anyone who wanted the real story should feel free to ask me. Then I called the jeweler. I arranged to return Daniel's engagement ring, the one he'd insisted on paying for himself as a symbol of commitment. And finally, just before dawn, I posted a photo to social media. It was the picture I'd taken of them in that hotel bed, both of them frozen mid-embrace. No caption, no explanation, just the truth laid bare. As the first rays of morning light filtered through my curtains, my phone began to explode. Calls, texts, notifications. But I didn't feel dread. I felt relief. I had spent years trying to be the perfect partner, the perfect friend, the perfect bride. And in the end, all it had done was make me an easy target. Not anymore. I sat on the edge of my bed, exhausted but strangely calm, and realized this was the first moment in a long time that I felt truly free. In that silence, I understood something vital. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's as simple as telling the truth and watching the liar scatter. And that was exactly what I intended to do. I don't remember driving back to the hotel suite. The city lights were just a smear of electric colors through the windshield, as if the universe itself had melted under the weight of betrayal. When I reached the elevator, my hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the key card. The gold numbers above the doors blinked and blinked, and every second felt like an insult, like the building itself was conspiring to hold me hostage in this limbo between knowing and doing. The corridor smelled like roses and carpet shampoo, a nauseating sweetness that only made me angrier. He'd ordered roses for me, probably to make himself feel less guilty. When I unlocked the door, I half expected to find him sitting there, smiling that practiced smile, rehearsing the lies he would feed me tomorrow before the ceremony. But the suite was empty, and that somehow felt worse. I threw my purse onto the couch and paced in a slow circle, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I knew I couldn't just sit here and let him walk back in as if nothing had happened. I couldn't be that woman, silent, compliant, humiliated in secret. I needed him to know he hadn't broken me. I needed him to see that he wasn't the clever, untouchable man he thought he was. So I picked up my phone and dialed his number. It rang twice before he answered, sounding breathless and annoyed. "Babe, can we do this tomorrow? I'm just wrapping up a few things." "You can save the performance," I interrupted, my voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "I know where you are. I saw everything." There was a pause, maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like time stopped. Then he let out a strangled laugh, the kind people make when they think they can still bluff their way out of disaster.
What are you talking about?
"You're being paranoid." "No," I said quietly, and in that moment, I felt something in me click into place, like a broken bone finally aligning. "I saw you. I watched you walk into her room. I waited for an hour. Don't insult me by pretending it didn't happen." Another silence. I imagined him staring at the wall, running through excuses in his mind like a coward flipping through cue cards. "You don't understand," he finally said. "It wasn't what it looked like." "Of course it wasn't," I said, my voice shaking now, but not with grief, with a dark, calm fury. "It never is. That's what men like you always say." I ended the call before he could answer. I didn't want to hear his voice anymore. I didn't want to hear the last crumbling pillars of our life together falling down in the form of pathetic explanations. Instead, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to every guest on our wedding list. I'd never typed so fast in my life. My fingers were a blur. Every keystroke felt like reclaiming a little piece of my dignity. Subject line: change of plans. Body: dear friends and family, I'm writing to let you know that tomorrow's wedding is canceled. It turns out the man I was supposed to marry has been cheating on me, most recently, the night before our ceremony. I'm sharing this not because I want pity, but because I refuse to pretend any longer. You all deserve the truth. If you are traveling for this event, I will personally cover your costs. If you want to reach out, I appreciate your kindness. But please don't feel obligated to comfort me. I am not broken. I am free." I read it twice, feeling the words hammer into place, undeniable and final. I hit send all. A burst of adrenaline surged through my chest. For the first time since I'd walked into that hotel bar, I could breathe. Just then, the door handle turned. He walked in, still wearing the same shirt, still smelling faintly of someone else's perfume. His eyes flicked to my laptop, then to my face. I could see the exact moment he realized the performance was over, and the audience, his family, my family, our friends, was about to watch him fall. "Did you just—" He gestured helplessly at the computer. "Yes," I said simply. "I did." He took a step toward me, his mouth opening like he thought he could still talk me down, but I raised my hand. "Don't," I said. "Don't say another word. You already said everything when you chose her." "You don't have to do this," he pleaded. "You don't have to humiliate me." "Humiliate you?" My voice cracked on the last syllable. "After everything? You think this is about humiliating you? This is about the truth." He dropped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. For a moment, the room was so quiet I could hear the soft buzz of the minibar refrigerator. My engagement ring was still on my finger, heavy and mocking. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled it off and set it on the glass coffee table between us. "You're free," I told him. "Free to be with whoever you want. And I'm free to never think of you again." He looked up, his eyes red. "You'll regret this." "No," I whispered. "You will." He didn't move when I picked up my purse. He didn't try to stop me when I walked to the door. And when I glanced back one last time, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, like a pathetic little man in a suit that no longer fit. As I stepped into the hallway, the door clicked shut behind me, and with it, so did the last chapter of that life. A surge of clarity cut through the pain. Tomorrow, instead of saying I do, I would wake up to my own freedom, and no apology, no desperate plea would ever take that away from me. I woke up the next morning in my old childhood bedroom, sunlight filtering through the thin curtains that still had those ridiculous cartoon prints my mother never took down. For a moment, I almost forgot everything that had happened. My mind was so numb it felt like I was floating above myself, watching some other woman's life unravel. I lay there, listening to the dull clink of pipes in the walls, the distant rumble of a neighbor's lawnmower. My phone sat on the nightstand, vibrating every few minutes with calls and messages I refused to read. Maybe a saner person would have picked it up, tried to make sense of everything or sought closure, but I'd had enough of hearing him explain himself, enough of that hollow pleading in his voice. I'd done what I had to do, and there was no going back. As I finally dragged myself up, my body felt heavy, like I'd aged a decade overnight. I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize my own reflection. My eyes were swollen from crying, but there was something harder behind them. A flint of cold determination. It was over. But as I pulled my hair into a messy bun and stared at the small silver ring dish on my dresser, I realized how incomplete everything felt. The dress was gone, the flowers canceled, the guests sent home in confusion. But the worst part was the emptiness inside me. The space where a life I'd imagined had been violently ripped out, roots and all. I thought I would feel triumphant after what I did last night, broadcasting his confession to every person we both knew, every family member, every friend who had believed his lies. I had pictured this moment 1,000 times, the freedom, the vindication, the righteous fury. Instead, there was only a hollow ache. I sat down on the edge of the bed and scrolled through the dozens of unread texts. Some were from friends offering their sympathy, others from people I barely knew, all wanting to know if it was true. If I had really canceled the wedding because he'd been sleeping with my bridesmaid. My stomach twisted every time I saw her name. It wasn't enough to expose him. It didn't erase the years of trust one had invested, the way I'd built my life around the idea of us. It didn't fix the fact that I'd believed in him. I closed my eyes and pressed my palm to my forehead, trying to will the memories away. But they came back in a rush, the moment I'd walked into that suite, the half-finished champagne, the trail of clothes on the carpet, her hair spilling across the pillow that was supposed to be mine. I told myself I would never forgive them, that I would make them both regret it for the rest of their lives. But now that the damage was done, I realized that regret wasn't enough. I needed to reclaim something. My dignity, my future, my sense of control. A knock at the bedroom door startled me so badly, I dropped my phone. My mother's voice came through, tentative and sad. "Sweetheart, are you hungry?" I couldn't answer. I didn't want her pity any more than I wanted his. I went to the window instead, pulling the curtain back to look at the street. My car was still parked outside, the trunk crammed with the remnants of my old life. Box centerpieces, folded programs, a bag of honeymoon clothes that would never see the beaches of Santorini. I wondered if I should just drive away, disappear for a while, leave the wreckage behind. But then my gaze fell on the white envelope propped on the nightstand. The final payment for the wedding venue, still unsigned. And for the first time since last night, I felt something sharp and alive surge in my chest. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands, remembering how much he'd bragged about footing the bill. How he'd insisted it was his treat, part of the image he liked to project. The generous fiancé, the successful businessman, the loyal partner. The irony made me laugh, a brittle sound that scraped my throat raw. If he thought I was going to quietly vanish, he didn't know me at all. I pulled out my laptop and opened the email thread with the venue manager. My hands trembled as I typed, but I forced myself to keep going, each keystroke steady and deliberate. I am writing to confirm that the event scheduled under my name is officially canceled. Please release the remaining date to other clients. As the contract was signed jointly, I am not responsible for any outstanding balance. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It wasn't revenge in the cinematic sense, no slashed tires or burned photographs. But it was something better. It was me refusing to pay for the funeral of a relationship he'd killed. I shut the laptop and stood up. My heart was still thrumming with adrenaline, but it felt different now, like I was waking up for the first time. I went to the closet and pulled out a suitcase, tossing in the bare essentials. Jeans, t-shirts, my passport, anything that belonged to me and no one else. As I zipped it closed, a notification pinged on my phone. I glanced down to see his name again, followed by a pathetic string of words. Please call me. I need to explain. I turned the phone face down. There was nothing left to explain. Outside, the afternoon was heating up. The neighbors' sprinklers hissed over the sidewalk, the air shimmering with that midsummer brightness that made everything feel surreal. I took the suitcase downstairs. My mother watched me from the kitchen, her expression lined with worry and a sorrow she couldn't put into words. I paused, unsure whether to hug her or say goodbye, but the moment passed before I could decide. Instead, I walked to the front door and put my hand on the knob. For a single breath, I let myself look back at the house, the memories, the pieces of my old life scattered like glass shards. And then I stepped outside, closing the door behind me with a quiet finality that felt more satisfying than any revenge could ever be. As I reached my car, I felt a presence, a prickle of awareness at the base of my neck. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a figure across the street. A woman, half hidden behind a hedge, watching me. My heart lurched. At first, I thought it was her, the bridesmaid who'd stolen everything. But as the woman stepped into the light, I realized it was someone else entirely. Someone I didn't recognize. She lifted her phone and took a photo before disappearing around the corner. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering in my throat. It was only later, hours after I'd driven away, that I realized the chilling truth. This story wasn't over. There were still pieces I didn't understand. And somewhere out there, someone was already rewriting the ending.